Miami looks to get back on track on Friday when they take on the Indiana Pacers. So we preview the game with SB Nation's Mark Schindler to talk about Tyrese Halliburton, the keys to the game, if the Pacers are looking to trade some key players at this point in the season, all that and more on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. And I'm Wes Goldberg, here with David Ramil and our friend Mark Schindler. However you might be tuning in, YouTube, Odyssey, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. We're excited for this one. Heat Pacers Friday night. We're going to preview the game. We're going to talk about some fake trades that could potentially happen between now and the February trade deadline between these two organizations here in a little bit. But let's just zoom out a little bit before we start talking about the specific game on Friday night. Again, very excited to see Tyrese Halliburton and Bennedict Mathurin in person. But Mark, what has been sort of the key storyline of the Indiana Pacers season so far?
Yeah, I mean, you just hit on it. Tyrese Halliburton and Bennedict Mathurin have been the story this year. Bennedict, I thought, was going to fit in well, and he's fit in swimmingly. He's gone through a couple of bumps and bruises as the year's gone on, but he continues to do a lot of really exciting shot-making things for somebody who's 20, 21 years old, first year in the league. And Tyrese Halliburton looks like he's going to be an all-star this year. He's been fantastic in every facet except defense, which has been really, really fun to watch, just seeing him get a little bit more aggressive, continue to find new ways to become more of an isolation scorer, and just be the guy who this team is pretty excited to build around. So I think those have been the two key storylines of seeing that backcourt really mold into something that the franchise is excited about moving forward.
Not a fake all-star.
It depends who you're talking about. If you ask a fake all-star, he might be a fake all-star, but yeah, I would say a very real all-star this year.
Where does Nembhard fit into that? I was just curious. I mean, no, it's an honest question. It's not even a joke. Like, he's looked really good. He obviously had that big game against the Warriors and had a nice run there. Like, is he a guy that figures into like the long-term plans for the Pacers?
I think so for sure. It's funny because I feel like he went from, obviously was 31st overall pick, was kind of a surprising pick because playing at Gonzaga, he was more of a slow paced player. They didn't really run a ton of up tempo stuff when he was there. Was much more of a game managing type point guard. And considering that they already had Halliburton, everything they'd done was about building into a really high pace up-tempo system built around him. It was like, okay, well, what does this mean? How does this factor in? And he's just been kind of awesome. He went from a player who really struggled to play off the ball because his shot was kind of a weakness for him until his final year at Gonzaga. And it was still small sample size, but they've used him a ton as a screener this year. They use him a lot as a secondary ball handler, and mainly too, like they are playing 3 or 4 guard lineups all the time. Like, it's very rare that they'll start with less now because Jalen Smith hasn't been starting, which that's a whole other thing. But they have been starting him a ton. They use him as their main point of attack defender, which is partially an indictment of what the roster is, but also he's fit in very well to do that. He's had some huge moments, obviously had the 31-point game against Golden State and was just on an entire other level. And I think he went from a guy who I thought could be a really good backup in the league when I was scouting him, prior to the draft, to a guy who I think could be a real starter at some point, depending on how good the shot gets. So he definitely factors in moving forward.
I want to ask about Halliburton because obviously he was a late season acquisition after the trade deadline, and he was okay in a few months with the Indiana Pacers. But of course, that was a rebuilding year. Now all of a sudden they've been unexpectedly good. But he is the engine that drives everything there, right? I mean, he has been sensational. Has there been anything that you've kind of seen is what has helped him make the leap this year in terms of just getting more comfortable, or is there something specific that he's done to become so much more effective this season?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest things is like when you looked at what Hallie was in Sacramento, right. And especially even like at the beginning of his time with the Pacers last year, like incredible passer, like otherworldly playmaker, just sees the court so well. The shot had obviously really improved in volume and just being able to get it off I think the bigger questions were what can he become as a scorer to really put pressure on a defense. And he's answered a lot of those questions this year. Like he has granted, it's his third year in the league, but career high in terms of how many shots he's actually taking at the rim. So he went from last year, even in his time with the Pacers, when he was handed the keys more, only 15% of his field goal attempts were at the rim. 22% of them are at the rim this year. He's been more aggressive, just trying to get deeper paint touches. And it's not perfect. I think that's also part of what's encouraging. Like you see room where he can still grow into like, okay, well, maybe instead of, looking to make this pass, you are being a little bit more assertive in trying to get your floater off or in trying to get all the way to the rim. And I honestly would say that he's not that he's blown my expectations out of the water, but he's definitely he's taken more steps this year than I think I was anticipating in that direction. And that is huge. That's a large reason for why they are 16-16 right now.
Has he had a positive impact on Miles Turner? Because it seems like Turner's game has changed a little bit. He's getting more shots at the rim too, as opposed to just being in pick and pop all the time, the way he has been earlier in his career. Has that been the main reason for that change?
Yeah, I think it's been that, and also just their the way that they play in general. Like their offense has struggled a little bit in the last month, as I think they've gotten scouted more and teams have tried to adapt to them. But credit to Miles because he's just been really assertive. I think that's been part of it. He's been way better at, if I remember correctly, he has currently got a career high in what his offensive rebounding percentage is. He's been more active in finding ways to duck in, attack the glass. He went from, and we saw this in the last game against the Heat, he went from, 2 years ago, or I guess it's 3 years ago now. Wow. When they played in the first round of the bubble, like they could not post him up against anybody, and they didn't look to post him up against anybody. Because he really struggled to score in those areas. And now they've been able to, it's not like an all the time thing, but if he gets it small on him, you can get in the ball and he's going to either take a shot over somebody or go up smooth towards the rim. It's, again, still not perfect, but I think there have been real strides. But they play like kind of transition in the half court in a way. Like they really try and do a lot of stuff with motion. They don't really fully set screens. Like it's a lot of trying to hit things at angles and with speed so that you can kind of get the most out of downhill gravity. And I think that's really benefited Miles because you see him getting to the line more. And again, that's gone down a little bit recently, but I still think that there's been improvement there. And he's only taking 4 threes a game. Like it's not like he still does it enough and has been effective. But like you mentioned, I think a lot of it is playing in a different system that's a little bit more spread out and focused on pace.
Yeah, you look at the pace. The Pacers play at a breakneck pace. The Heat don't. That's new.
Yeah.
But the similarity that both teams have is the fact that they move the ball a ton. The Pacers are second in the league in passes made per game. The Heat are top 10. And that's not anything new for the Miami Heat. And it's a little bit new for the Indiana Pacers. It's kind of Tyrese Halliburton comes and then all that stuff starts happening. You mentioned that they were 16-16 before, and it's sort of interesting that the Heat 16-16, the Pacers 16-16. Obviously, Indiana super, super young, Miami super, super old. But it does sort of feel like both of these organizations are a little bit at a crossroads here. It's like, okay, the Pacers, you kind of have something. What do you do to build on it? Where do you go from here? With the Heat, it's like, all right, conference finals last year, not so great of a start, a little bit uneven to start this year. What is kind of the future of this roster going forward? So I love seeing teams in kind of like these different spots in their sort of growth cycles, kind of meeting and just sort of figuring it out. Usually it ends up being a fun game, not like last time. Last time it was 87-82.
That was one of the grossest games I've watched all year.
That game sucked. There's no other way to put it. Hopefully it's a lot better. We're going to look ahead to what Friday night's matchup could look like in the next segment. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Well, this episode is brought to you by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. Did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you think law enforcement officers can't tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell, everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI. This paid for by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration.
Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on YouTube, Odyssey, and wherever you get podcasts. Friday night, Heat, Pacers in Miami. Mentioned before the break there, the last time these two teams met, garbage game. Nobody should have ever watched it, 87-82. Hoping for maybe a similar result for the Miami Heat, but a much different game in terms of the flow of the game. I'm just going to jump right into what I'm looking for. It's just both teams need to score more points. If you're either one of these teams, I don't think you can. What did Eric Spoelstra say after the last time these teams played, David? That Pat Riley would have loved this one. No, he wouldn't have. It wasn't the result of great defense. Both teams just couldn't make shots. So I think the key to for both teams going tonight is just to make shots. For the Pacers, Mark, probably not a problem. That 82 point performance was more of an anomaly, right?
Yeah, I think so. But also I really liked a lot of what the Heat did in that. Like Bam, like that was the game for me. Like I mean, obviously Bam would be top 3 easily for defensive player of the year right now. And I think that was one of the games where you see why. He just kind of eradicated
to the audience, Mark.
Yeah, well, I am a little bit, but also like you just got. I mean, it's been frustrating for me.
Top 3, and he's not 3 or 2. So let's call it what it is.
It's close, but like I think
your top 3 right now. Go.
OG.
I think it probably Bam, OG, Jaren Jackson Jr. If I had to do it right now.
All right.
But
Fair.
It's been funny because like as much as the Heat have been a little bit of a disappointment this year, I think it's almost been lost some of the strides that Bam has made and how good he's been this year. And the defense, like that defense in that game, he took Tyrese out of the game. Like his switching and just his ability to keep him in front was unreal. But also like Caleb Martin pressed him 94 feet most of the game. They were really active in just trying to prevent that. A lot more teams have been trying to do that. And I think the Heat kind of exposed a little bit of something that the Pacers need to get better at, which is handling some of that pressure, even if it's, maybe somebody else bringing up the ball. So I do expect the Heat to go back to that because that was really, really darn effective. But
Chris Duarte that game though, he was
that's true. So that does add another element. I would bet that the Pacers are going to score more in this and look a little bit better offensively. But I think it's going to be just interesting to see how Tyrese handles this because he's very much somebody who approaches each game and okay, well, how can I, change this up from what it was last time? So I think that I'm very interested just to see how he handles it because I don't know what is necessarily going to pull out of the bag to be different, but I think that there's a real chance that he looks a lot better in this game.
I think that's going to be the case. That was my second key. I've got 3 of them here as one does. And Halliburton, does he have a counter for Bam Adebayo? That was the next one I wanted to get to. And so look, Tyrese Halliburton probably has not looked like a young player the minute he stepped into the NBA. Like there's not many moments where he looked like a rookie or he looked like a young player. He looked young going against the Heat and going against Bam. And specifically, like he would just draw Bam into switches. And you're like, why? Like, didn't you watch the film? Like you're a smart, high IQ basketball player. Why are you doing this? And so I just think the obvious counter is just don't do that. Just when you have a guy on you, don't bring Bam into the switch. I know that's Halliburton's bread and butter. And, he's not the most athletic guy, even though I think that's a little overstated. I think he's got a pretty decent first step and things like that. But there's going to be opportunities, especially against some of Miami's weaker defenders, where you could just blow by that guy and just go for it. Or like you said, just get the ball to somebody else. Maybe it's not a complete blow by to the rim, but, that little like Tyler Herro started doing this a lot where you kind of have the ball, you kind of stunt to the nail a little bit, and then that just gets the defense to move just a little bit, and then you just kick out to an open shooter. The Pacers have some good shooters. Maybe that. So yeah, I'm with you. I just think, how does Halliburton counter Bam? Does he kind of just do the same game plan, or does he learn from that last one? I think we'll learn a lot tonight.
And look, I mean, we should point out too that we have no idea what Miami's starting lineup is going to look like. They had their full complement of players that last hideous game. So who knows? We know Jimmy Butler, if he's still recovering from crickets/water. Is Kyle Lowry going to be available? Is Caleb, one of their best defenders, going to be available? So that could be a completely different game plan. Wes, I'm curious. What do you think? How do you think Miami adjusts if they have to go to this bastardized lineup that they fielded the other night against the Bulls?
Yeah, I don't know because look, Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry both practiced today, so that's a good news. Yeah, good but Caleb Martin doesn't sound like he's gonna. I don't know. It doesn't sound like he's gonna be available. He's dealing with a sprained ankle, so
Max Strus probably starting his place.
Yeah. Or Duncan Robinson, since he's been shooting better. They'll probably go Strus for defense. But if you've got Jimmy Butler there, then it's a very different kind of game that we're talking about, right? Like Kyle Lowry's helpful, but he doesn't transform the way that the game looks and feels the way that Jimmy Butler does. If Jimmy Butler's in that game, they could slow this thing down and still do an 80-80 game if they really wanted to. Like you could just really
Spo's licking his chops, hoping for something.
I'm planning on going to this game. If Jimmy Butler plays, maybe I'll just be like, you know what? No, I'm not going. But it's if Jimmy Butler plays, I don't really know what the Pacers have in terms of matching up with him for 4 quarters. I don't know what it is. But if Jimmy Butler doesn't play, then there's a chance that this one could get pretty iffy for Miami. Can Tyler Herro step up and be a lead scorer? Well, maybe, but the Pacers, you put Halliburton on them. You could put Duarte on him. Like you've got options there. Bam Adebayo's got to be a huge factor offensively in a way that he wasn't necessarily in the last game. So there's that. The other part of it too is, can they limit the Pacers bench? Obviously, Benedict Mathurin is in the running, not just for rookie of the year, but for 6th man of the year. They held him to 9 points on 2 of 7 shooting the last time these teams played. That was mostly Tyler Herro actually playing pretty good defense on Mathurin, and a little bit of Victor Oladipo too. Victor Oladipo should obviously be available for this game. So can they continue to slow Indiana's bench? Because, David, as you know, like when the Heat have to miss Lowry and Jimmy Butler, it's like, all right, Jamal Cain, what do you got off the bench? And it doesn't look great. But if you have your full complement of players, obviously your bench lengthens and you're able to get to the players that you actually want to get to. So that's going to be key. What does the bench look like, I suppose? And can they at least play the Pacers bench even? I don't know. How's the Pacers bench been overall, Mark? Because most of the attention has been on Mathurin.
Yeah, it's been okay. I think what's been odd about this year is we went from, Jalen Smith was a starter to now he's been coming off the bench and he's looked fine, but it's especially that since they mentioned at the beginning of the year, like part of the stipulation with him resigning is because he was going to be a starter. So that's interesting for a multitude of reasons. But like TJ McConnell's been playing more lately and he's looked good. He does what he does. You know what you're getting from TJ. O'Shea Brissett
kills Miami every time. He kills Miami.
Yeah, I swear, man. It's kind of a blast to watch. But then O'Shea Brissett has shot better. He's still, again, like he's got some limitations, but I like what he brings. And I mean, with Chris Duarte being back, that changes up a lot too. Just bringing more shot creation, having a little bit more out there.
He's just too inconsistent, right? I mean, that's basically the knock on him at this point, is that he has a monster game like he did against Boston, then he could fall off the map the next game. So who knows what happens on Friday.
I'm hopeful for a better game because he went from he was dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury to start the year, and that really clearly was hurting him and limiting him. So Boston was his best game of the season, even if I don't think it was his highest scoring wise.
30-point game. Right?
In terms of just how he looked in general, like he was moving right, seeing the court better. If that's the Chris Duarte they're getting, I mean that's game changing for what this game could look like offensively.
Trade season is upon us. February 9th, trade deadline. Maybe something to be done between the Miami Heat and the Indiana Pacers. We're going to talk about that next. But first, David, tell the listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is still your number one source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. Well, no, why do I keep reading this? They have to change this copy. We've got it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Locked On Heat is on Twitter, on Instagram. LockedOnHeat@gmail.com is a great way to reach us as well. Let's talk about some trades here. The number one name that every fan base probably in the league has considered throwing into the trade machine is Miles Turner. I'm just going to start. Maybe if you guys want to have a lengthy Miles Turner conversation, we can. I just don't see a way that it gets done between the Heat and the Pacers. The only way I see it is if the Heat really, really want him and are willing to throw draft picks in it.
Yeah. How about at this point, I think maybe the better question is, how likely is it that they'll look to actually trade Miles? I mean, maybe he's somewhere in the same conversation as John Collins, as perpetually on the trade market, always available, always engaged in talks for a trade. But does it seem realistic now that with the improved record, the unexpectedly good record, that they're still looking to move Miles?
It's a great question, man. I think that it's somewhere in between right now. Based on anything that's been reported or that I've heard, it seems like there are a lot more talks about him potentially re-signing in Indiana, which is just compared to where this was a year ago, it's kind of wild looking at that. I question a little bit what that looks like just for this team in general, because I think, they mentioned at the end of last year and in the offseason, beginning of this year, that they were really focused on taking that next step to becoming a contending level team. And they knew that it was going to take time, or at least that's what they said. And so I do kind of wonder a little bit if they've been, if they got a little bit surprised by how they came out the gates this year. And if that has changed things for them. We haven't been able to talk to the front office or anything, so I don't know if that has changed on their end. Mm-hmm. I'd really be interested to know, undercover what they do think about that, and if that has impacted what they think with Miles. On the other hand, this is probably the highest his trade value has been in quite some time. He's been healthy. He's playing the best basketball of his career, arguably. The defense has been really good, as always. And offensively, he's really shown, okay, he does hit a little bit of another gear when he can play in a different system than he was playing in years prior. So I still think I look at them as very much I think that they need to make the Miles trade. Not that I dislike Miles or anything, just for where the team seems to want to go. I think that's what makes most sense, because he's been their second best player this year. He adds an element that really raises the floor for what the team is this year. And if they're serious about being a player in the draft with their own first round pick this year, I do think that they need to consider that.
This is all part of your Goga Bitadze agenda, Mark, clearly.
Well, the problem is we went from Goga Bitadze being the guy who is perpetually out of the lineup to now Isaiah Jackson has DMP'd recently multiple times. And that's the guy they traded up to select in the first round 2 years ago. So that's been, a little bit frustrating and confusing to see because, when you think about how this year was supposed to be about development, obviously there are guys that are developing, but when you aren't prioritizing the development of a first round pick, it is a little bit questionable. So that has been kind of odd.
I want to talk about Isaiah Jackson, though, because that's the name that I kind of had circled there, because you mentioned he's out of the rotation. He plays power forward. He's a physical guy. I think he could be of use to a team like the Miami Heat. But the last point on Miles Turner there, I do wonder how much of this reporting that has been out there, it's, maybe we're actually going to just re-sign him. How much of that is just leverage? Because you're right. His trade value is really high. His stuff in the paint, his numbers in the paint are way better than they've ever on both ends, defensively and offensively. He's always gotten a bunch of blocks, but he's just a much better overall rim protector this year than he ever has been, really. And then, the finishing stuff is better than it has been recently. So his trade value is really high, and I think he could be a lot of use. I just don't see a path, even if the Heat really wanted him. I don't really see a pathway. Duncan Robinson's contract sort of matches up. It's easy to kind of get there salary-wise, but I don't know what a Heat pick is really worth to the Pacers when you consider how many teams could be out there. If the Lakers basically put any of their unprotected picks, that trumps what with the expiring contracts. That is immediately better than whatever the Heat can do. And then there's other teams that could be in the mix for Miles Turner that could probably offer something better. So let's talk about Isaiah Jackson, because he makes $2.5 million. Pretty easy to negotiate a deal at that salary. Also, Miami has a bunch of salaries sort of in that range. But David, what are your thoughts on adding a guy like Isaiah Jackson? That's a marginal thing, nothing that's going to be crazy for the Heat, but could be another body there in the front court.
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you're able to move Dwayne Dedmon, right? If you want to add somebody like that who you can continue to develop, it makes more sense that way. If you don't have to have this logjam at the center position, I think you're already looking forward to getting Omer Yurtseven back and continuing to develop him. So that makes a lot of sense. If you can free up that salary from Dedmon and find him,
I think he can play power forward, Isaiah Jackson. I think he can play next to Bam with the rebounding and everything like that, and the way that Bam could space the floor with the playmaking. Isaiah Jackson takes threes sometimes. I don't know.
That's a possibility. Mark, what do you think? You think he could slide down to the fourth spot?
See, he's tough because the flashes are really awesome, but he's so far away from being a consistent player on either end right now.
Right.
He makes a lot of events happen on defense. He's going to get blocks, he's going to get steals, but he's still biting at every pump fake. He really can't play as a solo rim protector. I view it, and I'm not trying to I know you guys know the Heat better than me, but when I look at the Heat, I think that they need to have somebody who can like legit play the 5 next to Bam if they want to be as switchy as they seem to want to be. Which I have qualms with that because I think sometimes like it can be to their own detriment with how much they go into it. But Isaiah is just like so far away from being that guy. And then offensively, like again, like the idea is doing some of the same stuff as Bam. Like he's shown a little bit of face-up flash. He has some nice passing flashes out in his bag, some short roll stuff, but for the most part, it's just so far away from being consistent right now, which is largely why he's not playing. Like that, I don't know if I would trust Spo to get stuff out of him, but I do feel like it'd be a little bit like the KZ situation.
Well, you just talked me out of it. If he's not an immediate contributor, then I don't want anything to do. I liked him in college, which was why I like those guys though. I was a big Precious Achiuwa.
He couldn't go 20 something minutes without bringing a KZ Okpala.
Of course, I did.
That's his thing.
What's the trade value of O'Shea Brissett at this point?
That's a great question. I would be curious on what it is. It's probably less than a first round pick. Like if the 3 is really falling for him, he's a solid player. But the issue is he's really more of a 4, like a true 4 than anything else because he's not super switchy. Like he can try and stay in front of somebody, but he's got a high base, so he's not really great at guarding smaller players. But he's also not really strong enough to guard bigger wings. So he's much better as a help defender overall. And then he's really good like leaking out in transition and being an active off-ball player. But that's a really niche thing. Like that's like he does really positive things, but I think it would just have to be for the right team. I think he could do stuff for Miami, but
He seems like a Heat kind of guy. He just plays hard, and that the Heat fall in love with those guys, even if they're not talented at all. They're just like, you just play super hard. So we're all the way in. What are the Pacers looking for going ahead of obviously maybe but the big stuff is, can we find the right deal for Miles Turner? Can we find the right deal for Buddy Hield? But beyond that stuff, what are the Pacers looking to add, like short-term salary and not give up picks or young players to kind of fit with this core? Like, what are they looking for?
That's a great question because I have no idea. Like, I think that's what makes it so odd with them because being where they're at right now, they're like you mentioned off top, like they're in kind of a crossroads a little bit of where they are going to go this year. I think they're in a tough spot of like, I just don't know how you're adding young players to this without really subtracting something or really moving somebody else out. So that's where it's like, okay, you kind of have to make a decision on where this is headed. I do think like any kind of draft compensation, just capital moving forward that they can use either for their own gains or to make further trades down the line. I think that's what they should be focused on. Or maybe like if they view a young player that they really like, which no offense to the Heat, I don't know who is there. That I would be
lightly used Gabe Vincent.
I do like Gabe Vincent. He's had a rough.
Everyone loves Gabe
I
Vincent.
Like Gabe Vincent a lot. But exactly, like they have like 6 guards right now. So like, okay, who? Like, are you going to play a 4-guard lineup all the time? Like, exactly. It's I don't know if there's necessarily a natural deal there.
Well, let's try to do one anyway. O'Shea Brissett at $1.8 million. Max Strus makes 1.8. Omer Yurtseven makes 1.7. Let's say hypothetically you guys the Pacers move Miles Turner for whatever, draft picks, whatever it's going to be. You get the Lakers stuff. Okay. Now you have one less center on the roster. Would you do something like with the Pacers? Could I interest you in Omer Yurtseven and a 2nd-round pick for O'Shea Brissett?
Nah, probably
Fair
not.
I would have said the same thing. Now, so that's the first offer. Max Strus for O'Shea Brissett?
I would do that. I think especially with like what Rick likes to run.
Wow.
He makes a ton of sense in Indiana just as a movement shooter. But again,
closer to home too, right? Closer. He's from Chicago, right? So
true. DePaul legend. Never forget. But
DePaul player, maybe. I don't know.
He was a
legend from DePaul.
He's got they got his jersey in the coach's office.
I don't realize that. Okay,
yeah,
you know what?
Did a profile on him last year about
back on it. Legend
coach mentioned it. David, is that interesting to you? DePaul legend Max Strus for O'Shea Brissett? Is that something that you would do or no?
At this point, since Duncan seems unmovable and since Max has been shooting 20% from the field over the last few games, then I think it's a good fit. Like it just goes back to our conversation weeks ago when we were talking about trading Max for Jay Crowder. We were like, no way, we'll never do it. And now it's like, I think you can get anything of value at this point as his the likelihood of him re-signing is less and less with every passing game. And yeah, you hope that he can eventually find his rhythm again, but maybe he's just a player who can't find his rhythm in Miami. So if they get somebody like Brissett over, I think would be a great fit for Miami. And yeah, something they could use as far as their front court depth.
Well, can't wait for the people in the YouTube comments to torch us over that fake trade, but that's what we do it for anyway. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Mark, can you tell our listeners where they could find you and what you got going on?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on. You can find me on Twitter at MG_Schindler. I'm kind of doing a lot of things, so I think that's the best place to find me. I'm always active there and have stuff up. So appreciate you guys.
Not for your food takes, which are absolute trash.
They are pretty bad. Yeah,
they are.
What are you referencing there? What's the food take that's not good?
Oh, I don't know if you follow Mark then, because it's like in between tweets about like optimism on said player or like something out of nowhere from the WNBA, and then all of a sudden it's like ketchup is disgusting or something. I don't know. It's just like there's a lot of stuff.
Mark, do you agree that ketchup is disgusting?
It's fine. It depends what you're putting it on, but for the most part, like it's kind of it's whatever. It's just a thing, you know.
I think that's the whole sales. That's like kind of the slogan for ketchup. It's like we're just a thing that exists, so you kind of have to have us. Like we're everywhere.
Spicy ketchup's better.
That is a garbage food take, David. You're right. Mark.
Damn.
Hey, what's your stand on chocolate and mint as a combination? Thin mints? You like thin mints?
I don't like mint. I think mint's kind of bad.
Yeah, all right.
Mint, like
maybe
mints are getting better. And that's
this is an anti-mint podcast. I'm not a big mojito guy.
Okay. See, I'll fight you on that. I love mojitos, but yeah,
that's because you don't live in South Florida.
That's probably a fair point.
I don't see them everywhere.
Yeah.
All
right, Mark. This has been real. It's been fun. We'll never invite you again because of the spicy ketchup thing, but have a nice life and
nice holiday. Nice holiday and a nice life. There you go.